Hello, and welcome to Business 125, Business English, the lecture on the sentence. Now, you've probably read some of the text and looked at subjects and verbs and have done pretty well so far up to about what I call self-assessment C. But I'm putting a lecture on from this point on, as I find that this is an area where students tend to have a little bit more trouble or make some mistakes. So this lecture will help complement what the book talks about and give you some things to go over to help you deal with sentences that aren't in normal order, being subject, verb, and then other material, but sentences that are commands or requests or questions or begin with here and there, and it will help you find subjects easily. And I do promise information and stuff like this will be on the upcoming quiz and test. So let's get started. We know about normal order. Normal order is when we have the subject first and then the verb, like I will study, or I will study for the test. The subject is I, and then will study is my verb. But what about when you have other patterns, things where sentences begin with here and there, like here are the reports you ordered, or there goes the neighborhood, or a command and request, something like please study, or simply saying study. Where's the subject there? It sounds as if you only have some verbs. And what about questions? In questions, we have an inverted order. The verb actually comes first, like, what about questions? So let's take a look at these three, and I promise you if you take the time to listen to this, you'll do better on the upcoming quiz and exam. Okay, let's take a look first at some here and there sentences. The first thing I want to make sure you understand is that here and there are never the subject of the sentence. Here and there are never the predicate or the verb of the sentence. So in the upcoming quizzes and exams, when I ask you for the subject or verb and I begin a sentence like this with here or there, please don't tell me here or there is the subject. Here and there are adverbs, and therefore, by definition, they can't be the subject. So this is a sentence not in normal order. Another way to think about this sentence is, rather than saying there is the obstacle, you could say an obstacle is there. And that's what we call taking the sentence and putting it in normal order to help make the subject very clear. And in this case, the subject is obstacle and the verb is. You could say an obstacle is over there, or an obstacle is in the box, but in this case, we're just giving the nondescript, it's there. So how about there could be a mistake? There is not the subject. We could probably figure out that could be is the verb. But in order to understand where the true subject is, just put it in normal order. What could be? Well, a mistake could be, and it makes us say a mistake could be there. And now we can see that the subject is mistake and the verb is could be. Same thing with there has been a disaster. Following this rule, you would say a disaster has been there. And I know these are kind of wacky sounding sentences. I prefer when you write the sentence, you write it as there has been a disaster. But simply reordering them in this way helps us really get to the root of where the subject and the verb is. So in this case, disaster. And then here is the problem. The problem is here. The problem is the subject and is your verb. Hopefully this helps. I love here and there sentences and do plan to put them on the quiz and the exam. Let's take a look at commands and requests. When we command something, it's usually made directly to someone. And so the understood subject, that's right, we call it the understood subject, is always you. For example, if I were to point at you and say, be quiet, or point at you and say, go, that's sort of like saying, hey, you, be quiet, or be quiet, you, or go, you, go. But we don't put the you in there. It's just understood. And therefore, in commands such as these, the understood subject is you. If you want to make the command a request, just put please in front of it, but the subject is still you. Hey, you, please be quiet. Hey, you, please go. Please sign it, you. But we don't say that. We simply say the commands this way, but the subject, which is understood, is still you. Another of my favorites for the upcoming quiz and exams. How about questions? What makes questions difficult is that the verb is separated and it begins the sentence, like, for example, has the mail arrived? And again, we're going to use the same trick here by making this question a statement, and that will help us get to the subject and verb. So think about, has the mail arrived? That could be rewritten as, the mail has arrived. And now we can easily see our verb has arrived, and the subject is mail. Do you have the time? If you rearrange this, you should come up with, you do have the time. And now our verb is do have, and the subject is you. Were you comfortable? Rearrange this to, you were comfortable. And now it's easy to see your verb is were, and your subject is you. So let's give it a try. Let's talk about our frog that we stuck in the freezer, and we'll start with the question, is the frog in the freezer? Well, if we were to rewrite that, we would say the frog is in the freezer. Your subject is frog. Here is your frozen frog. Or we could say your frozen frog is here. The subject, it's the frog. There goes your frozen frog, nicely defrosted. Your frozen frog goes there, or your nicely defrosted frozen frog goes there. Your subject, it's still the frog. But don't get confused by these last two. Defrost this frog immediately. That sounds like a command. Hey you, defrost this frog immediately. The subject is you. And please refreeze this frozen frog. Hey you, please refreeze this frozen frog. And you shouldn't have to ask any questions. The subject is you. So a few other things that are important in this part of the lecture and in this part of your book is understanding clauses and phrases. So when we talk about clauses, clauses are usually a group of words with a subject and a predicate, and they can be independent or dependent. So an independent clause, just like an independent person, could stand on its own. It could make its own sentence. But a dependent clause is a group of words that can't make its own dependent. Again, just like children or people who are dependent, they need help. They can't stand on their own. You might have a subject or a verb in there, but you certainly don't have a sentence. Like you could have something like, even with the decline of housing sales. Yeah, right? I'm waiting to hear something. Even with the decline in housing sales. That's a dependent clause. We're talking about housing sales, decline, but it's dependent. It needs to be attached to something. You're waiting. So even with the decline in housing sales, the market was still strong. That's an independent clause. So you might want to take a look at self-assessment E, and if you want to pause this, you can. Self-assessment E will test your knowledge of these topics. And I'm going to move on. Let's take a look at phrases. Phrases are groups of words that don't have a subject or a predicate. Prepositional phrases, it's helpful that you cross these out when looking for subjects. And prepositional phrases usually have some kind of preposition which denotes position. You learned this at the very beginning, like in the office, at the seminar. There are infinitive phrases. They always have to in front of them. You don't want to confuse these with prepositional phrases, or you don't want to confuse these with verbs. So, I like to study. I like to eat. Well, like is my verb. To study is just my infinitive phrase. And then don't forget about helper verbs when you're doing the quiz, that you need to include all the helpers, and helpers are usually parts of the verb that enable conjugation. You might want to take a look at self-assessment F, and perhaps you need to pause this to do that. And then don't forget to listen to my audio answers. And I'll wait for a moment. We also want to talk about sentence fragments. Remember, sentences, there are 3 requirements. You need a subject, you need a predicate, but the key is that it expresses a complete thought and it makes sense. So the sentence here, the chicken wants to cross the road because that's the way the joke is told. Nice. That is a sentence. Our subject is chicken, and wants is our verb. To cross is our infinitive. But if we had something like this, the chicken wants to cross the road. Ooh, okay. That could also be a sentence. We see our subject and we see our verb. But the second part, because that's the way the joke is told, that's a fragment. That can't really stand on its own, even though you've got, you know, the way and the joke and is and all that. This can't stand on its own. It's a fragment. Take a look at self-assessment G. Listen to my audio answers. Make sure all of this makes sense. That's it. That's it for helping you understand the sentence. Good luck on the quiz, and let me know if you have any questions about this material. Thank you.